Hello and welcome to video number one of our mini series. This is Jeff and Scott, and we're really excited to be putting together this three-part course free for you to enjoy, which is essentially our attempt to share our greatest passion, which is sacred geometry in all its forms with you. And we've been working with this amazing discipline for nearly over 30 years collectively. And it's just been this huge, great life enhancer for us. So, yeah, my name's Jeff. I'm based in Ireland. Scott, do you want to say hello and shout out where you're speaking from?
Yeah, I'm in Western Canada, and so we're coming to you from a third of the world apart, basically.
Are you as excited as I am, Scott, about putting this video together?
I am very excited. Yes.
Me too. Yeah, so just broadly speaking, we've got three videos put together, and it's a kind of an introduction to an invitation that we're really putting to you to invite you on our big course, which is a very considered 8 module journey through a voyage through sacred geometry, where we've designed this kind of very special way of understanding, learning about, and experiencing sacred geometry. So at the end of this video, I'd like to share just a little bit more about that. But right now, the title of this video is about how sacred geometry can transform you. So we'd like to really speak to that. But maybe before we do that, Scott, would we give a little bit of a backstory just in terms of how we got into sacred geometry and how we met, maybe, just to give the viewers a context.
That sounds great. Yeah. Do you want me to jump into that?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so I've been using geometry since high school geometry class, and then got into studying architecture in university, and this was the kind of quantitative use of geometry. And I never knew there was such a thing as sacred geometry from my schooling. And it wasn't until years of drawing for the sake of drawing, just for fun, that I encountered this beautiful quality of geometry. Like I was sort of in rapture by drawing these things. And I felt at first that I was, maybe it was my own idiosyncratic thing, until I sort of discovered other like-minded people who are doing this also, and just having the best time of it. Mm-hmm. And so this comes about from the qualities of geometry itself, rather than using geometry to make things in the world. Mm-hmm. What we're doing here is we're using the qualities of geometry and introspecting on the geometry, and it's an invitation to really go deeper in yourself. Mm-hmm. And so that was my initial experience of geometry. And then I got into that whole worldview of understanding patterns in the world and seeing these geometries everywhere. And that inspired me to create this documentary series in 2010 called Secrets in Plain Sight. And that's actually how Jeff and I met, because you watched that documentary and then contacted me for an interview. Isn't that right?
Yeah, exactly right. And just to sort of speak to my own journey to Secrets in Plain Sight, I was kind of I've always been a kind of active spiritual seeker. I just seem to be born that way, and I've always had a sort of inbuilt intuition that there's more to reality than we confront through our senses, So I was always looking for ways that I could maybe understand the world around me that would help me go deeper. And I think what happened was I came across mandala artwork when I was in college through the study of Carl Jung, who's just like very renowned psychologist from the last century, and he put together this incredible map of the mind. And I then at some stage I started just drawing mandalas myself, and I was having these huge big experiences that were kind of really deeply profound, actually. I was amazed how these simple forms could activate consciousness in such a powerful way. And I know you and I, Scott, have spoken about this, that at that early stages of our journey with sacred geometry, it was a little bit solitary, wasn't it? We were kind of like on our own trips, if you like. And what was lovely about Secrets in Plain Sight was it was like our connecting point, because I was intuiting all these things from kind of inner experience. And when you made that movie, and by the way, the movie's amazing. I really recommend you check it out. It's like a 3.5 hour epic kind of like exposition of all these beautiful patterns of order that are literally hidden in plain sight. And it was such a relief nearly for me to see that body of work that you put together, Scott, that I was like, oh my goodness, I've got to get in touch with this guy. Can you remember why I wanted to get in touch with you, by the way?
I do remember you had a kind of a burning question you wanted to ask me, and it was,
Yeah.
I think it was about crop circles. You said like you've shown all these different patterns in the world, in the cosmos, in architecture and art, but why didn't you talk about crop circles, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I was like, there is no way that this guy could put all this together, know all of this about geometry. You were talking about the tesseract in the Grand Arch. You were talking about like hexagons on the on Saturn. You were talking about these, ancient philosophies and how they're all kind of imbued with geometry. And I, amongst other things, just had a great passion for the geometry of crop circles. And I was fascinated that, it was fascinating to me that its omission was kind of very significant,
And then
and
when you asked me that, I was like, I felt like I had to confess that actually crop circles, I didn't put them in the documentary because I actually felt they were too loaded a subject in a way. They were too controversial in my mind, at least at that time.
yeah,
But then I really I adore crop circle geometry because it's got a lot of beautiful geometry in it. And yeah, and that was actually the catalyst for me making the documentary in the first place. Was me
yeah,
spending so many hours alone drawing crop circle geometry on my computer, and that led me to perceive these patterns in the world, which actually led to the documentary itself. So it was our little
yeah.
secret, like, yeah, that's what actually got me going on it. I'm glad you see that too, but I didn't put it in the documentary. And that's
Yeah,
actually
and
not in our course at all, but we're just kind of mentioning it here, I think, just to give you a
yeah, it's
point
kind
of
of,
reference.
it's funny. It's like you can talk about anything to do with sacred geometry, but for some reason, crop circles seem to be a step too far in our culture, for many people. But I think we've got over that ourselves, haven't we? It's just like, the truth is, we're really fascinated with the extraordinary high level of geometry that appear in crop circles. And I used to be a little bit shyer, maybe. I think it's because we're maturing, Scott. We're like, look, here's the deal, here's the full disclosure, Scott and Jeff stepping out into the world. And that feels fine, to be honest. As you say, it's not a big part of our course, but it is something we enjoy. Um, but listen, I wanted to sort of dive into the sort of essence of this particular video, Scott, which is essentially we want to speak about quite explicitly, how does sacred geometry transform you? Like in my opinion, sacred geometry has probably enhanced my life more than any other meditative tool or discipline I've come across, And I'd really like in this video to share with the viewers what I mean by that. Like, what do you mean, Jeff, when you say sacred geometry can really transform your life, we've written down a few little points here, and there's no sort of like fixed agenda or anything, but I think one of the things we're both agreed upon is that I think the big umbrella, if you wanted to put over sacred geometry and how it transforms you as an individual, is that it brings you into a way of seeing the world as a kind of an interconnected whole, for use of a better word. That there seems to be patterns of order that underlie the manifestation of all things, that somewhere in their arising into form, they are driven and bound by sacred geometric proportions and ratios. And I have had a total transformation personally from, being a little bit concerned that perhaps we were living in a kind of a meaningless universe, that didn't have any order to it, to really coming way back home to not just a kind of a peace, but a kind of a joy that goes with like seeing the world through new eyes, and it's, I know Richard Tarnas talks about the idea. He wrote that lovely book, Passion of the Western Mind and Psyche and Cosmos. He's a brilliant writer, but he speaks about how we moved from a disenchanted view of the universe to an enchanted view of the universe. You use different terminology, but would you like to speak to that interconnected principle?
Absolutely, yeah. So the way I think of it is geometry is actually a universal language. It transcends all human cultures and time periods, and presumably it would be the same everywhere in the universe.
Mm.
And so this is a very special um, study of geometry because it is so universal. And when you encounter when you really get into geometry, you're experiencing this profound truth. Like you can't argue with a geometric form. It is profoundly true, transcendently so. And then when you have this experience of truth like that, it has an inherent beauty to it. And when you really unpack that, it also has a blissful quality, a quality of being that's really hard to beat.
Can I
These
jump
are,
in there, Scott? I'm loving what you're saying, but I just feel it could be helpful for us to tease out what do you mean by like a sacred geometric form is truthful? Like if we were to talk about how can a triangle, for example, be truthful, or how can a square be truthful?
yeah. Well, when you just think of these forms in general with a kind of mundane consciousness, there's nothing to it. It's a square, circle, triangle. Who cares?
Yeah.
And you might use them to build your house or whatever. They have a purpose maybe, but it's only when you um, look at the qualities of them. It's almost like sitting down on the beach and looking at the sunset, and you're appreciating the beauty of that moment. And,
Mm.
and that's what we're getting into with geometry is we're appreciating the beauty in the moment that we draw this, let's say, a pentagram, and we complete the diagram. There's this
Mm.
moment of opening that happens in you that's similar to like appreciating a sunset or biting down on some delicious chocolate and just thinking, oh, that is so good. you know
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
this qualia that philosophers talk about, that we're
Mm.
that we're going for when we talk about geometry being sacred.
Hmm.
See.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying, and I feel this type of connection to living in an interconnected universe happens on many levels, and on one level, a really gorgeous level, is quite simple for me. I've sort of opened to see geometry in simple things like when I go for a walk here in springtime and I see the daffodils, not just will I notice the fact that a daffodil is surrounded by sixfold geometry and the petals lie in a sixfold shape, but because I've kind of worked on sixfold geometry and I've kind of embodied the qualities of that, there's almost like a resonant sort of interaction between sixfoldness in the daffodil and what I'm carrying inside myself, and so or you look at a daisy, or there's fivefold flowers, or a really big one actually is the relationship of the moon and our earth. And I know our big course is based upon this particular archetype called squaring the circle. I won't get into that now, but the point I'm trying to make for now is when you realize there's this gorgeous relationship, this beautiful geometric relationship, in this case, the square and the circle, between the moon and the earth. I now look at, so last night there was a full moon, and you look at the moon and it's so gorgeous, in all its radiance. But you now are able to kind of put the moon in context or relationship to the planet you're standing on, just in terms of its relative size and proportion, and know that there's a geometric relationship between our planet and its closest satellite, and it changes you. It doesn't change you straight away. It's not like a kind of a bolt of lightning and you're awakened or anything. It's a sort of a slow, gradual opening to this sort of realization that our world is imbued with this beauty, and this beauty seems to be embedded with an intelligence, which is like the life force of all forms that come into being. Or at least that's the way it feels for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I feel very much the same way. It's like when you train yourself with geometry, it's like you have different glasses you put on, and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden you start to see things differently. You start to notice patterns. You start to notice geometries in the flowers, in the movement of the planets, in architecture, in urban design, in everything around you, in your
The
garden bed,
human body.
in
Yeah.
body, everything. And it gives you this kind of profound sense of of peace, of harmony. You know that there's this order underlying everything. And what's really beautiful about geometry is it's kind of baggage free. You know, it's as simple as a triangle. You know, it
Yeah.
doesn't. There's not a whole mythology built up around it. It's just something that you can directly understand by drawing it yourself. And
That's
it's not so much a mental thing. It's a whole body experience. That's why we urge people to draw with a compass and a straight edge and a pencil on paper, because it involves
yeah.
more of your body, and that you have this full experience of it then.
Yeah, yeah, and I really like, as you're speaking about drawing the geometry and how that changes you, leads us on to another way sacred geometry can really transform you is it makes you more creative. I mean, just quite simply, you become more creative. The minute you begin to draw sacred geometry, you become, it's a creative act, isn't it? And look, I'm not saying sacred geometry is, some sort of special, creative school or anything. Like, you can be creative in any discipline, music, poetry, writing, or even just basic day-to-day stuff like cooking, making a good soup, or how you do the garden, but creativity is a special state of being, really, and so when we are presenting sacred geometry, our invitation is really to invite people to draw with their own hands, the archetypes, of sacred geometry, and I really feel this has been hugely transformative for me in my own journey, but before I go on about that, um, I'd love to invite you to say a few words on how do you feel sacred geometry helps make you more creative.
Well, I would say I have kind of a warning for you, and that is if you really get into geometry, you might make a 3.5 hour documentary series about it. I mean, that's what I found. I did. I had to do it. You know, it's like it gets you. It kind of unlocks the creative juices, and then you know it just propels you forward. And I felt like I was just sort of taken over by this quest to find geometry, to depict it, to make illustrations, to be involved with it, and that it's a kind of a peak experience, I have to say, of being in that flow of working with geometry. And so I think we're trying to not just fill up your mind with water like a pail, but we're trying to kindle this fire in you of this love for geometry, and who
Yeah,
knows where that will take you. You know, that's the really exciting part, is to turn people onto this and just set them loose and see what happens, you know,
yeah,
because
yeah,
when their creativity um, you know, is really always very surprising and interesting what will come out. You know, everyone is so unique and individual in that expression.
yeah.
And I know that's something that we've experienced in the workshops we've done together in person,
You
is
bet.
you see the people really coming into their own individual expression, and it's just a beautiful thing. Can you speak to that, Jeff?
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, that leads us on nicely. That I feel that when you get creative, we speak about, like, you seem to get connected with a side of yourself which is kind of out of bounds in our day-to-day state of being, that, like, oftentimes if we're just in the world, we can merely be more like receptacles into which the kind of the agendas or the, you know, the huge incomings of the world flow into us. It can be a bit exhausting, actually. And I find creativity is this incredible kind of rebellious act almost, because it reverses that flow. And then you begin to express some aspect of yourself. And when I say reverse the flow, it's like some aspect of something deeply meaningful for you, something that comes inside of you, is then moves outward into manifestation. You know, whether it's a painting or a poem or a soup or a piece of sacred geometry. You know, this happens in any creative feat, you know, but I feel I've been transformed hugely. I was very slow to call myself an artist, or even that I had artistic leanings. But the truth is, we all do. Every one of us is a born artist, you know.
And I think
And
some
this,
people have a fear of like, am I going to be put on the spot? Do I have to make something? No, you not at all. And everyone can do it. And I remember in our workshop there was one participant who was really afraid of drawing because of her experiences in school. You know, being told she was bad at it. And
yeah,
and I remember one thing I said about the compass needle going in the paper is it actually has an indentation you can feel with your fingers, you know. And for some reason that was a trigger for her that just allowed her to say, oh, I can feel that, you know. And then it allowed her to not be afraid, because it was like
yeah,
using another sense. And then she
yeah,
was able to make the most beautiful diagram. And it's just like a lot of people have these blocks that were set up in childhood or bad experiences, but um, it's everyone can do this. It's very inclusive, and because we're using this universal language, it is very very universal in its appeal, and it's not like it's a hard thing to do. It's just like drawing a line. Anyone can do that.
yeah. And there's some gorgeous things about geometry, that because we're made of these things and our world is made of these things, when we begin to actually manifest them from within ourselves and bring them, you know, into manifestation, even just drawing on a page, which is just the way we do it. Um, we're kind of coming into harmony with this great big intelligence or something, which is really, really pleasing, actually, you know. But I wanted to speak about the next way that sacred geometry can transform, because it very much dovetails into this point on creativity. And you mentioned it already, that it definitely enhances the arising of individuality, or the arising of connection with who you are really, beyond the kind of the masks we wear and the kind of the cultural conditioning that we all undergo just being in the world. There's something about the journey with sacred geometry that takes you inward. And when it takes you inward, you connect with something, and definitely that something, I believe, is like who you are in the truest sense of who you are. You know, you connect, and what I mean by this is, with the workshops, you know, we've done, and I've done many workshops here with people working with sacred geometry for over 12 years now, and, you know, worked with hundreds of people. One of the things that's always blown my mind is that you can lay out a room with 20 mandala templates, the same shape essentially, and people are given, broadly speaking, the same palette of colors, or the same palette of sand, of colored sand. And it is remarkable to see that when people begin to truly express that part of themselves that's deeper down, their kind of authentic self, or whatever, however you want to call it, it's unbelievable to witness the arising in the same time and space, all the multiplicity of expressions that are so different. You know, you begin to see this. I know it's a bit cliche that we're all individuals, you know, but when you get creative and you do it in this way, you really connect with that kind of the uniqueness of your own energy print, you know. And am I making sense that in terms of like honoring this? It amplifies individuality somehow, doesn't it, Scott?
Yeah, and it's kind of an antidote to what we see in culture, kind of largely with this kind of homogenization that takes place.
Yeah.
Uh, and so it's very refreshing, in fact, to realize the, you know, everyone is so individual, and there's quite a beauty to that, and in appreciating that. And it just
Yeah.
naturally arises out of contemplation of geometric forms. And my rational mind is like, why does that happen? I've struggled with that, and that inspired me to write my most recent book on sacred geometry, to try to explain why. You know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, I love your point about homogenization, is kind of I'm a huge fan of that Irish philosopher, John O'Donoghue. He's like this beautiful poet and philosopher who unfortunately passed away about 20 years ago, But the reason I'm mentioning him is that he was writing 20 years ago about like how individuality is kind of really being ravaged. He said that was his words, it's been ravaged because of the homogenization of our world, right? And this was 20 years ago, probably more than 20 years ago. And now I think the world we live in, with just the acceleration of the algorithms and the way we condition our minds with, even, whatever. I mean, I love technology and it has a huge amount of benefits, but I also feel that there is a sort of a sameness to the incoming that we all expose ourselves to. Certainly, the medium of communication is the same, largely driven by our screens. And what you find is when you close your eyes and you go inward, and you begin to connect with sort of the seat of your soul or whatever. Um, it's a very, very different source of inspiration to draw energy from, and it really changes you. Really, and I actually feel in many ways it's the last remaining kind of oasis of freedom where you can truly be who you are, truly be who you are when you connect with that inner source of who you are. It's one of the greatest things about, I think, what we're offering on our course is like we've very intentionally designed a course to support a kind of a deep opening to that side of yourself. Isn't that fair to say?
yeah, I would say that the point of geometry, if there is a point, is not the geometry. Ironically, geometry is a vehicle that allows you to go very deep inward, and I see that as the point. In a way, this vehicle gets you there, but what you want to do is enjoy the journey, and also anticipate that destination that you can get to, this transformative destination of going very deep inside yourself.
Yeah, yeah, and doesn't that link to I know another point we wanted to make in this video, Scott, was about how it kind of brings you into presence. It's like this sort of, when I make mandalas or I draw geometry, I find the past and all of the sort of stickiness of what's gone on in my day or my week or my life even begins to kind of dissolve a little bit, and I'm unhooked somewhat from the future and all the thoughts I have about what I'm doing, where I'm going, and blah blah blah. And somehow by simply in my workshops where we use sand, we use shells, just this kind of one pointed awareness on a single analog activity, just seems to bring you into the present, into, Eckhart Tolle would call it the power of now. But I really relate to that principle, that there's an infinity really in this now, this ever present moment, and working with geometry is conducive to bringing you into like deeper levels of presence, kind of inside yourself. Is that fair?
Absolutely, yeah. So it brings you into this flow state where you're just in the present, and that in itself is very healing and transformative. Just to spend hours in this state is a treat. Whenever I do a drawing and it takes me an hour and I come out of it, I just feel like re-energized, and it's like, God, I was asleep before and now I feel awake, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's particularly profound at the in-person workshops, isn't it? But I wanted to speak to one. I wanted to speak to the magic of being able to come together in person, and I look forward to that in the future. But maybe we should give a little mention to, I suppose. Well, my concerns were very strong about would we even be able to replicate what we do in person in an online format, And I know, courtesy of the pandemic, if there is a silver lining, I've realized that actually when you bring your authentic self, into a state of presence, and you use the technologies like Zoom, it's one of the ones we're going to use in our course, it's entirely possible to connect with people in a really authentic way and to go very, very deep, you know. And it's not the same as in-person workshops, but it has certain things actually that are probably better than in-person workshops. And of course, in-person workshops have things that's better than doing it on Zoom.
Well,
Um,
it's certainly more convenient to be at home while you do
yeah,
this. And it's really amazing to connect with people all over the world who share your
yeah,
passion. That's really a unique thing that we're all kind of experiencing now with the pandemic, you know?
yeah. I love that thing. It's like all these people come together from all over the world, and what binds us together is a shared love of this passion, sacred geometry. And then as we do this work together, like meditations or discussions or you know visualizations that we have to share with people, we're all doing it like from our various like locations on the planet, you know. I sometimes kind of think of it like planetary acupuncture, you know. If there's like 30 people all getting together drawing a mandala, you know, it's you're bound together just by the very principle of like doing the same thing, you know.
We're creating
um
kind of geometric grid on the earth in that sense of
yeah,
where we're located.
it's a lovely metaphor, you know. Um, and then listen, I know time is pressing on, but I just, you know, we had one more point that we wanted to mention, and you know, at the outset, it probably sounds a bit woo woo, you know, but I do think it's important to share our true belief that, like, ultimately, sacred geometry, in our opinion, has the capacity to connect you with higher forces, you know. Now, let me just caveat that before I say higher forces, because it sounds like a grand claim. You know, you can interpret that in whatever way is meaningful for you, you know. So like for some people that will be like an aspect of your higher self, you know, that it just kind of connects you with, you know, we all have had in our better moments, you know, a connection with a side of ourselves that's just able to kind of inform us or guide us in a way that really has our well-being at heart, you know. um but I have to be honest, you know, I personally believe that, like, what happens for me, at least when I work with sacred geometry, is I begin to get exposed and I begin to become receptive to this great pattern of order, which is responsible for binding all of creation together, you know?
And
And
it's very transpersonal in that aspect. It goes
yeah,
beyond you as an individual, and it connects
yeah,
you with something larger for certainly. And
yeah,
that is one of the beauties of geometry, is it's not just this idiosyncratic activity that you have, but it's actually something that everyone can share
yeah.
because it is so universal.
It's so universal and it's different for everybody, you know. And I suppose one of the core essences of our workshop, Scott, is that what we really encourage is it's an invitation for people to come and do a deep dive, but ultimately to find out whatever truth is meaningful for themselves, you know. And we're kind of working from the premise that the person who knows what's best for you is actually you. You know, it's not like Scott and Jeff have the answers here. It's not even that sacred geometry has the answers here, but there's kind of an innate wisdom within you that you can tap into. And sacred geometry is a great tool. It's not the only tool, but it's a great tool to tap into that source of wisdom within yourself, which is it's radically transformative when you connect with this and you start living from that source, the source of who you truly are. It's actually game changing. I suppose that's ultimately what we're getting at in our big course, that when we say that sacred geometry really has the power to transform you, um, this is kind of what we're getting at, you know. And so ultimately we would love to invite you aboard our 8 module master workshop, which we're very, very excited about. And we will speak next week about some of the specific elements that we've designed. Scott's put together this incredible teaching portal in terms of supporting you draw sacred geometry. We'll be able to show you that in that video. And in week 3, we're going to talk about sort of the power of presence and how sacred geometry can really help deepen your own individual state of presence, and how you then in tandem become more present for others and get to experience the world around you from a deeper place. And you will be changed at the end of the eight modules, you know, in a way that we're just really, really excited about sharing with you, you know. So if that floats your boat, if that's something that like you feel, really our attempt here tonight was to kind of share our vibe with you. We're deeply excited about it. We'd love to have you aboard. Scott, do you have anything to shout out to people in terms of our invitation to our big workshop?
Yeah, I encourage you all to check out these 3 videos in our mini course and then contemplate about what feels right for you. If you'd like to join us in the full 8-module workshop, I encourage you to do so. So
Yeah.
thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you. It's been great. And we'll see you next time. All right. Thank you.